the section that we need to take care of and we need to pay attention to through all the development that we will be having. We need to look at the environment as well. And to give us a little bit tidbit on that aspect, we'll call on Mr. Kemraj Parsram, who is the Executive Director of the Environmental Protection Agency, to share with us his views on the environmental section of HSSE. Mr. Parsram.
That was a long walk. And of course, Hema probably gave my talk already. Never mind, I'm just kidding. Some 26 years ago, a much younger version of me was based at a large-scale gold mining operation, OMI Gold Mines on the Essequibo River. How many of you recall that some 26 years ago, the OMI Gold Mines? The 19th of August, 1995 was a routine day for me, undergoing training that involved monitoring water quality and other discharges into the environment. All was seemingly well, no issues expected. That evening, I attended a barbecue and had a few beers and retired to my room roughly around 10, 11 o'clock. I couldn't remember exactly the time. But I was suddenly awakened out of my sleep with a loud knock on my door and someone shouting, "Mr. Parsram, Mr. Parsram, the tailings dam broke." Well, the rest was history. 2.9 million cubic meters of cyanide containing slurry flowed into the OMI River and then into the Essequibo River. 80 kilometers of the Essequibo River were declared an environmental disaster zone. The spill initially posed risk to drinking water for approximately 200 persons along the first 40 km of the Essequibo River. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here and, of course, to be invited by AMCHAM to speak on what the EPA's vision is. In highlighting the importance of HSE in your businesses, and of course, our individual and combined duty to protect the environment and human health, and the EPA's purpose and vision in this regard, I had to take you back down to that day in history some 26 years ago. This was a personal example, of course, and it has shown us that devastating accidents do happen and can happen anywhere at any time. And like the others as well who've mentioned, other speakers. And more recently, let me remind you, several incidents highlighted in the media, from several mine pit failures to sinking fishing vessels and fires, and of course the numerous examples that all the other speakers mentioned, and the statistics mentioned earlier. At the global level, in the 1970s and 80s, you would have heard of the Bhopal gas leak or the Chernobyl nuclear radiation incident. And most recently, in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon explosion and oil spill comes to mind. These accidents were not, or in fact, they were characterized by significant loss of lives and affected several communities, health, livelihoods, and environment beyond the location of the actual incident. Health and safety and environment systems are critical for any business or activity, no matter the scale. The three facets of the HSC acronym, health, safety, and environment, I must repeat them, share equal importance and are not mutually exclusive of each other. The neglect of either has implication for the others. The HS in HSE deals with the industrial and workplace health and safety measures, and of course, people's reactions to it. The E relates to sound environmental science and management systems. You will have to forgive me for this, but some lazy companies love to think that safety specialists can deal with all facets of HSE, and the environmental management component often becomes a sideshow. Health and safety management systems were around a long time. The companies associated with all these major incidents mentioned had them in place. But is it just enough to have an HSE system in place? Omago Mines had the best, perhaps, environmental management system at the time. It was reported that the failure of the dam resulted from inadequate application of well-understood technology at the time and engineering techniques, and possibly overcapacity of the dam. With regards to the Deepwater Horizon accident, was having an HSE system in place enough to prevent the accident? I am sure managers believed that they had the best system in place, and they perhaps did, but it was rendered ineffective by a key recurrent element, and we saw it in the previous presentation: people. You, me, all of us. Now, this is where the importance of ensuring that the culture operating within our companies are aligned with the expectations of the management system that is really important and must be emphasized. The HSE system is just the structure to the arrangement for managing the business safely and effectively. For an HSE management system to meet its objectives, people throughout and that must believe in it and work to achieve them. History and recent events have provided us with much important lessons that we can learn from and chart current and future HSE efforts, and efforts that treat with the environment as an equal and important component, with same level of technical support and finances. Now, what then is the vision of the EPA with regards to HSE? As a response to the OMI 1995 incident, the Environmental Protection Act was passed a year later in 1996, which established and mandated the EPA to promote, facilitate, and coordinate effective environmental management and protection and sustainable use of natural resources, including prevention and management of pollution. The Act empowered the agency to oversee the environmental activities of all persons, whether they be multinational corporations or small operations under one's place of abode, as is common in Guyana. Several environmental regulations were also promulgated in 2000, and these regulate noise, air quality, water quality, and hazardous waste. These laws set out several obligations and requirements for citizens and businesses alike to ensure protection of human health and the environment. Our environmental authorization, compliance and enforcement, and compliance assistance program seek to operationalize these laws. Now, where there are gaps in setting of standards and examples related to air quality and water quality, etc., where applicable, we rely on, adopt, and promote international guidelines such as those of the World Health Organization or the IFC, International Finance Corporation, and World Bank, the IOGP guidelines, and OG-UK, among others. Now, with the nascent oil and gas industry, we rely more and more on these established international standards. Importantly, we are not overly prescriptive. However, in our regulation of the various sectors, we use something called performance-based indicators or performance-based approach. We believe that different types of regulatory approaches are needed for different situations. A good regulatory posture must be flexible, recognizing that one size does not fit all, one that considers the possibility of changing circumstances and find a good balance between ensuring safety and enhancing the environment. Some regulated community situations are more suited to performance-based regulation, while others lend themselves to a more prescriptive approach. EPA's approach is therefore a mix of performance-based and prescriptive requirements. We believe that those that create the risk are best placed to manage them, and our role as a regulator is to provide assurance to communities, to government, and that what businesses say they will do are in fact doing so. Now, of course, when things go wrong, we investigate, we apply the law as applicable, of course, and hold you or hold the businesses accountable. Our mixed approach provides flexibility in compliance because we can focus on outcomes rather than solely on the precise factors to be controlled and the means of controlling them. A code of practice, for example, or environmental guidelines which we have, as we know them in Guyana, are tools that we can be used to augment performance-based health, safety, and environmental management systems. Codes and guidelines are designed to provide practical guidance on how to achieve compliance. These can be developed collaboratively with industry and other stakeholders, and to provide easily understandable description of roles, expectation, and outcomes for all. Now, permit me now to highlight a few of our expectations of the regulated community, and that is probably many of you. But before I do that, let me highlight this reality. We as regulators are perhaps often seen as a breed of miserable people. By you, of course, the regulated community. All right? You are not always necessarily happy to see us or hear from us. We are not exactly, in your view, delivering services. And you don't get a choice of a regulator like a customer as you would in the private sector. You think that you will do nothing bad, and regulation is suffocating. On the other hand, we are also not well appreciated by the public. And you can see that over the past few months by the numerous articles in the media and the comments on social media. There is only one thing that the public expects of us: prevent harm always, no matter what. I can give you an example. A fuel spill from a truck transporting fuel on the highway turned over, and the public sees it as a regulatory failure of the EPA. Where were we? Why didn't you see it coming? Why were you asleep? Come on, do a better job. So damn if you do and damn if you don't. Anyway, we believe though, and that the key message here is that it's not just the job of the regulator to ensure health, safety, and environmental protection. We all have an environmental duty, a general duty of protection of human health and environment in all that we do. Now, to our key expectations, risk-based regulation and promotion of appropriate standards is EPA's approach. In simple terms, we expect that businesses will follow a safety case regime by identifying the risks associated with their activities at early planning or feasibility stage, or for those activities already in place, to take a step back and determining what they are and mitigating those risks, and ensuring, or at least applying reasonably practicable, proportionate mitigation measures to the level of risk, including using appropriate best practices and best available technology. The starting point is risk and not rules, really. Simply, in the area of environmental protection, the focus is on activities and processes to prevent environmental pollution and harm by preventing, reducing, and managing, where possible, eliminating noise, air, and water contaminants. Risk will always be present in our businesses and our activities. Understanding and managing it is crucial. Assessing and controlling risk in a structured way will help your business prevent harm to human health and the environment. And of course, comply with the legal obligations and meet regulators and the community's expectations. If we don't do this, the repercussions of harm can be far-reaching, and preventing it, of course, can save your business greatly from tremendous costs, such as loss of lives, environmental damage, and of course, fines and litigation, and of course, even your reputation. We don't normally, or in fact, prescribe methods or frameworks for doing this risk assessment. There are a dime a dozen. All we ask is whatever system you use, you identify the risks that may cause harm, assess those risks in terms of the level of severity, likelihood, and consequence. I think the fellow from ExxonMobil mentioned that earlier. And you regularly check the effectiveness of the controls and adapt accordingly. We ask that you ensure adequate efforts and resources be dedicated to training and updated regularly, taking into consideration new and appropriate best practices. We, from time to time, also may require an environmental management plan along with an emergency response plan or contingency plan. And in the case of oil and gas, an oil spill response plan. And we expect that these be submitted and approved before we issue you a permit. Now, these are critical plans for informing us of how you will manage your risks. Don't see them as burdensome. When they're approved, you are required to review, update, and test them regularly. They are living documents, not to be left on someone's bookshelf in the office to gather dust. Now, why do I say so? And my colleague mentioned some of the risk earlier. In 2019, a government-initiated unannounced exercise in the US found serious vulnerabilities in readiness for oil spills. For example, a simple thing from that same example earlier, persons responsible for answering the phone for an emergency notification ignored it because they thought it was some telemarketer calling them. Or they deployed the wrong oil spill response listed equipment in many of the cases. Now, these are just a few of the things. Now, these plans, as I said, must not just be to satisfy the EPA's requirements, but rather we ask that you ensure that there's continuous training, there's continuous simulation of emergency scenarios, including involving and training stakeholders, not just your staff and your organization, but involve other parties, civil society and government. Dedicate financial resources or invest in training and best available technologies and practices. We also importantly ask that you act in good faith and communicate with us on issues and challenges. Let us work together to finding solutions and ensuring compliance, and of course, preventing and managing harm. I want to end and leave this final thought with all of you, whether you're business, whether you're government regulators as well, or NGO. The traditional antagonistic way of addressing environmental sustainability is no longer tenable. It's a past era approach. Nothing changed with that modus of operandi. We need other approaches. How do we solve problems in our marriages, at home, or at the workplace? We do that by cooperating, by partnerships, by open conversations and trust, right? Now, so why aren't we all doing this in this day and age? For the EPA, it is our approach to come to the table on the premise of trust, cooperation, and clearly communicating our expectations and working together to achieve them. Not standoffish and antagonistic. The EPA welcomes the opportunity to work with developers to ensure that their rights to operate and earn a living does not compromise the right to a healthy and safe environment. Our Constitution embodies this, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parsram, for reminding us of how important our environment and our ecosystem is to our survival as human beings. So given the essence of time, and I know many of us here as HSSE budding professionals or specialists, we're all interested in learning the different aspects of HSSE. And for that, back in 2021, when we had the second conference, we spoke